Did you think your mother's house would go to you? She signed it over to me. My husband laughed during the funeral, then drove off, leaving me at the cemetery. I was about to start the 10-mile walk home when a sleek black car suddenly pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and a distinguished-looking man asked, "Are you Brittany Mays? The daughter of the woman who once saved my life?" Hello. Please comment below where you're from. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy listening. The last handful of cold, sticky earth landed on the coffin lid. A dull thump echoed somewhere deep inside me, in my chest, as if it weren't clumps of dirt falling, but my own heart crashing down. That was it. Mom was gone. The thought was simple and monstrous all at once, and my mind refused to accept it. I stood gripping the thin fabric of my black coat, staring into the empty grave, frozen. The wind cut through me, a raw November chill. It whipped the bare branches, tore the last withered leaves from the trees, and tossed them onto the fresh grave mounds. There weren't many people. In recent years, Mom had lived quietly, almost like a recluse. A few elderly neighbors, a distant relative I hadn't seen in 20 years, and my Aunt Lydia, Mom's older sister. They shuffled awkwardly for a bit, murmuring their condolences, then started to leave. No one wanted to linger in the damp wind. I stayed put until the workers picked up their shovels. My husband, Chris, stood silently beside me the whole time. Not a single word had passed his lips, he just held my arm. His grip was firm, almost painfully so, but I was grateful. I felt if he let go, I'd collapse right there on the cold ground. When the grave diggers finished and a neat mound of fresh earth rose before us, Chris finally released my hand. I turned to tell him it was time to go home, to hold the wake, but the words stuck in my throat. He looked at me strangely. There was no sorrow in his eyes, no empathy. There was something else, cold and calculating, with the faintest cruel smirk on his lips. "What?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my elbow tightly, his fingers digging into my arm like a vice, and pulled me aside, behind an old weeping willow, away from the empty path where the few remaining guests were leaving. "Listen carefully, Brittany." His voice was quiet, almost hissing, making it even more terrifying. "It's over. Your mother is dead." I stared at him, not understanding. Of course, she was dead. We had just buried her. Why say something so obvious, so monstrous? "Chris, what are you talking about?" "We need to go," I said. He cut me off, his smirk widening, growing bolder. "No, Brittany. I'm the one going. You can go wherever you want." A chill, unlike the November wind, crept up from my feet. I looked at the face of the man I had lived with for 15 years and didn't recognize him. I didn't understand until he said the words, slowly, savoring them, staring me straight in the eyes. "Did you think your mother's house would go to you? How naive. She signed it over to me." The world wavered. The words echoed in my head, but their meaning wouldn't sink in. Signed over? To him? Mom would never do that. She loved me. That house, it was everything we had. My father's memory, our nest, the only place I ever felt safe. "You're lying," I breathed. "Why are you lying? On a day like this?" Chris laughed. Quietly, but in a way that made shivers run down my spine. It was the laugh of a winner, the laugh of someone who had been waiting for this moment and finally got it. "Lying? Oh no. It's all official, darling. Deed signed. A month ago. So the house is mine. And everything in it. And you're homeless now." He released his grip, pushing me away. I staggered but held onto the cold, wet trunk of the willow. He turned and walked to our car by the cemetery gate. Our car, the very one we bought with the money I had saved from my salary. I watched him get behind the wheel. The door slammed. In the cemetery silence, the engine roared unnaturally loud. He didn't look at me. He just drove onto the road, and in moments, the car disappeared around the bend. I was alone. Among the graves, under the gray, crying sky. The wind grew stronger, hurling icy raindrops at my face. I couldn't move. My mind was a total void. No tears, no pain, just a deafening, ringing emptiness. He had left me here. He had said the house was his. Minutes stretched into eternity. My body began to stiffen. I realized I had to do something, go somewhere. But where? Home. The word sounded like mockery in my mind. Home, to a house that was no longer mine. It was 10 miles to the city. I knew it precisely because we had traveled this road many times. 10 miles on foot, along the highway, in a thin coat and awkward shoes. The thought was as insane as everything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. But there was no other way. No buses ran here. I had no money for a taxi. My wallet was in the car, and my bag on the back seat. With Chris. Summoning my last strength, I took a step. Then another. I slowly trudged along the gravel path toward the cemetery exit. My legs felt like lead, each step was a struggle. I reached the gate and stopped at the roadside. Cars rushed past, people heading to their warm homes, to their families. And I stood there, on the edge of a life that wasn't mine, abandoned and betrayed. Despair rose in my throat like a bitter lump. I closed my eyes. Mom. Mommy, what is this? What's happening? So many questions, and not a single answer. Only the cold wind and the roar of passing cars. I was about to take my first step along the muddy shoulder when something changed. The sound of traffic faded, replaced by the steady hum of a luxury engine. I opened my eyes. Right in front of me, almost touching the edge of the road with its wheels, was a massive black car. Polished to a mirror-like shine, it seemed completely out of place on this gray, dreary road. I froze, not knowing what to think. Maybe it was someone I knew, who I hadn't noticed at the funeral. Or maybe just someone offering a ride to a lone woman in black. The tinted window on the passenger side slowly and silently slid down. Inside sat a man. Solid, around 55, in a sharp dark suit. He had a serious, strong face and calm, attentive eyes. He was looking straight at me. "Are you Brittany Mays?" His voice was low and steady. He said my name as if he had known me all his life. I nodded, confused, unable to speak. How did he know me? I had never seen this man before. He paused for a second, as if giving me time to gather myself, then asked a question that made my frozen heart skip a beat. The daughter of the woman who once saved my life? What? Saved his life? My mom? She had spent her whole life working as a librarian. A quiet, modest woman. Who could she have saved? This had to be a mistake. I don't understand, I stammered. The man let out a barely audible sigh. His gaze softened, showing compassion. I understand, this is a terribly inappropriate time for such a conversation. My name is Killian Blackwood. Please, get in the car, Brittany. You're cold. I'll explain everything on the way. I hesitated. Get in a car with a stranger? But what did I have to lose? My own husband had just abandoned me, taking everything. What worse could happen? I walked around the car and sat in the front seat. The interior was warm, filled with the scent of fine leather. The door closed with a soft click, cutting me off from the cold wind and the road noise. The car started moving smoothly. For a while, we drove in silence. I stared out the window at the dull autumn landscape rushing past, trying to make sense of what was happening. This man, Killian Blackwood, claimed my mom had saved his life. I couldn't wrap my head around it. He must have sensed my confusion. Your mother never told you? His tone was not a question, more a statement. He sighed again. She was an extraordinary woman. Incredibly modest and proud. I tried many times to repay her, but she always refused. He was silent, eyes focused on the road. I waited, afraid to interrupt. Brittany, what I'm about to tell you may shock you even more than everything else. But you need to know. Your mother didn't just save my life. Many years ago, when I had nothing, when everyone had betrayed me, she did something far more remarkable. She gave me all her savings. I turned sharply toward him. Savings? What savings? Mom had never had much money. She gave me everything she had, down to the last cent. The very money she told you was lost during the economic crisis. Lost during the economic crisis. I had heard that phrase all my life. Mom always said all their savings with Dad had vanished during the financial crisis, like millions of others. I never doubted her. And now Killian Blackwood continued, his voice quiet but every word weighted like stone. She didn't just give it. She made me swear a sacred oath that if anything ever happened to her, or to you, if you were ever in desperate need, I would repay that debt. Not to her, directly to you. She said, to my daughter. Everything I have. He turned to look at me. His calm eyes were full of determination. I saw what happened at the cemetery gate. I saw your husband drive away. I heard what was said. It seems, Brittany, that day has come. I turned to the stranger who somehow seemed trustworthy. Take me home, I said firmly, without a tremor. Please. Right now. He didn't ask any questions. He just nodded and smoothly turned the car onto the empty highway. We drove toward the city, and I looked not at the road, but at my clenched hands on my lap. One thought hammered in my mind. He couldn't do this. Mom would never, but Chris was so certain. That smirk. He had enjoyed my pain. He wanted to see me crushed. No. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The support of this man, Killian, felt like a strong, invisible frame. I didn't know who he was, didn't fully understand the weight of his story. But I was no longer alone. And that was enough. Finally, we reached my neighborhood. Familiar apartment buildings, worn-down playgrounds, a few passers-by bundled in their coats. Everything looked as it always had, as if no cemetery had existed. No nightmare. The car turned into our yard and stopped at the third building. My building. I'll go in alone, I said, straightening my shoulders. Could you wait for me? I'll be here as long as you need, Killian answered calmly. I stepped out. My legs shook slightly, but I forced myself to walk straight. I entered the building. The smell. The same smell I knew from childhood. A mix of dampness, cooking from the first-floor apartment, and old paint. I practically ran up to the fourth floor, and then, on the stair landing, I heard it. The sharp, screeching sound of a drill. My heart dropped. Outside our apartment door stood Chris. He wasn't alone. Next to him, some stranger in a work jumpsuit was fiddling with the lock. Our old lock lay on the dirty floor. What are you doing? I shouted, leaping the last steps. Chris turned. That same expression of superiority from the cemetery was on his face. He was waiting for me. He wanted this. Well, look who's here, he said lazily, leaning against the doorframe. How was your little walk? Not too cold? The man with the drill fell silent, embarrassed, and looked away. What are you doing in my house? I hissed, stepping closer. I wanted to push him, to storm inside, but he raised a hand, pressing it against my shoulder. Calm down, little hysteric. Not yours. Mine. I already explained everything. Or is that too hard for you to understand? He slipped his hand into the inner pocket of his expensive coat and pulled out several folded sheets of paper. He shoved them toward my face with force. Here. Read, smarty. If you haven't forgotten how to read. Deed. From your beloved mommy. To me. Chris Osman. Signed a month ago. Notarized. Everything legal. I recoiled, trying to focus on the lines. The letters danced before my eyes. But I could see it, the official letterhead. The stamp. And at the bottom, a signature, wobbly, weak, just as Mom's hand had become in her last months of illness. But it was her signature, or something very close to it. This can't be. She couldn't have. She could, Brittany. Oh, she could. Chris laughed, tucking the papers back into his coat. She realized her little daughter was weak and worthless. That you wouldn't know how to handle an apartment properly. But I could. I'm strong. I'm the master. Your mother appreciated that. Each of his words was like a slap. He was talking about my mom, my dearest, closest person, and turning her into a monster who had betrayed her own daughter. You're lying. I lunged for the door again. Let me in. My things are in there. Things? He raised an eyebrow mockingly. Ah, yes. Things. I thought about your comfort. He turned, stepped into the apartment, and a second later emerged holding a small cardboard box tied with string. A shoebox. Here. This is everything you own. I packed it. Don't thank me. He didn't hand me the box. He just tossed it at my feet. It hit the steps, the string snapped, and a pitiful pile spilled out. Old photographs. My school diary. A worn teddy bear I had slept with as a child. Mom's favorite chip mug. Things with no monetary value, but which made up my entire life. You have nothing, Brittany, he whispered, leaning close to my ear. No house, no money, no family. You are nothing. Now get out. And don't you dare come back. Or I'll call the police. Understand? He straightened up. Meanwhile, the man in the jumpsuit had installed the new lock and handed Chris a shiny set of keys. Chris took them, inserted one, turned it, click. Again, click. Then he looked at me one last time, pure, unclouded hatred in his gaze. The door slammed shut in front of my nose. The lock clanged. I was alone on the stairwell. Complete silence. Even the neighbors, who surely heard everything through their thin doors, were too afraid to come out. I slowly sank onto the cold concrete steps. The humiliation was all-consuming, making it hard to breathe. He hadn't just thrown me out. He had crushed me. He had displayed my entire life as a joke, packed into a shoebox. Tears ran down my cheeks, but I barely noticed. Mechanically, on autopilot, I began gathering the scattered items. Here's a photo, little me with bows in my hair, sitting on Mom's lap. We're both laughing. Mom looks so young, so beautiful. Another one, me with Chris on our wedding day. He looks at me with such love, or so I had always thought. I crumpled the photo and tucked it into my pocket. I picked up the teddy bear, dusted it off, held it close. Then the mug. The diary. As almost everything was back in the box, my fingers felt something else at the bottom. A small sheet of squared notebook paper, neatly folded into quarters. I unfolded it. The handwriting was Mom's, so familiar it hurt. Not the shaky signature on the deed, but her usual, confident writing. There were only 4 words on the page. 4 strange, mysterious words. Don't trust the walls. What did that mean? Don't trust the walls of this house? I reread the note over and over. Nonsense. Maybe Mom had written it while delirious from illness. But the handwriting was clear. I ran my fingers over the paper again, preparing to fold it and put it away. And then I felt it. Inside the folded paper, between the layers, something hard, small. My heart raced. Carefully, afraid of tearing it, I fully unfolded the sheet. Right in the middle, beneath the words, lay a small, tarnished key. It looked unlike any key I had ever seen, neither for the apartment nor for the mailbox. Old, with an ornate bow and a complex bit. I had never seen it before in my life. I held it in my hand. The cold metal burned my skin. Don't trust the walls, and this key, leading somewhere unknown. I sat on the cold steps, clutching the strange key. The note and the key. It was something. A message from Mom, left after her death. A thread to hold onto in this collapsing world. I carefully folded the note, slipped the key into my coat pocket, and stood up. I gathered the sad remnants of my life into the box, holding it to my chest like the greatest treasure, and walked down the stairs. Outside the building, Killian Blackwood's black car was still parked by the roadside. He saw me, stepped out, and silently opened the back door. I sat down, placing the box beside me. He got behind the wheel, cast a quick, appraising glance at me, and didn't ask a word. He just saw everything reflected on my face. "Where to now?" he asked quietly. I didn't know. Where? To a friend? Everyone had their own family, their own problems. I didn't want to burden anyone. To Aunt Lydia? Killian paused for a moment. In your state, I won't leave you alone. Chris could be dangerous. You'll come with me. That's not up for discussion. You need to recover, rest, and think about your next steps. I wanted to protest, to say it was inconvenient, that I didn't want to be a burden. But I had no strength. I just nodded. The car moved, heading in a direction completely unfamiliar to me, toward an upscale neighborhood outside the city, where mansions stood behind high fences. His house was enormous, but not ostentatious, strict, modern, built of dark brick and glass. Inside, it was just as spacious and quiet, all in calm, muted tones. I was greeted by a woman of about 35, with a short haircut and sharp, perceptive eyes. "This is my daughter, Lily," Killian introduced her. "Lily, this is Brittany Mays, Gwynette's daughter. She needs to stay with us for a few days." Lily looked at me, at the box in my hands, at my tear-stained face. There was no pity in her eyes, just restrained curiosity and something else, a shadow of understanding. She didn't ask any questions. "Of course, Dad. Come on, I'll show you your room." The guest room was bigger than my entire former living room, with a huge bed, a private bathroom, and a terrace overlooking a pine forest. Lily set a bottle of water and a glass on the table. "Make yourself comfortable. If you need anything, just say. We won't bother you." She left, quietly closing the door behind her. I set the box on the floor and went to the window, staring at the trees for a long time. For the first time in this endless day, I felt complete silence and safety. And then it hit me. I slid down the wall to the floor and sobbed. Not quietly, not restrained, but like a child, shaking all over. I cried for my mom, my ruined home, my husband's betrayal, my helplessness and humiliation. I don't know how long I sat there. In the morning, I woke up in the bed, covered with a blanket. Apparently, Lily or Killian had come in and moved me. On a chair hung a clean dress, and breakfast was on the nightstand. The shame mixed with gratitude. These strangers, essentially, were showing me more care than my own husband had in years. At breakfast, Killian was businesslike and composed. "Brittany, tears won't help. We need a plan. I've already called my lawyer. His name is Cliff. He's the best in the city for property disputes. He'll be here in an hour. You need to tell him everything in full detail." Cliff was a short, energetic man with a sharp gaze. I told him everything that had happened, Chris's words, the deed he had shown me, the lock change. He listened silently, taking notes. "A deed signed a month before the death of a seriously ill person is always suspicious," he said when I finished. "Especially in favor of an indirect heir, the daughter's husband. Legally, if the document is properly drawn up, it's very hard to contest. You would need to prove your mother was incapacitated at the time of signing, or that she was under duress." "She was weak, but of sound mind," I exclaimed. "As for duress, Chris could have done it. He could have intimidated or deceived her. That will have to be proven in court." The lawyer shook his head. "Words alone won't suffice. I need to see the document itself." "You don't have a copy, I assume?" "No." He just waved it in front of me. "I see. Then the first step is to get an official copy from the notary's office. I'll make a request. But it will take time. Do you remember the notary's name? The seal?" I strained to recall the blurry letters on the form. Something like P, Parker, or Peterson, maybe. There are 3 notaries in the city with P. We'll have to check them all. But there's a faster way. You can go yourself, as a direct heir, and demand to see all documents concerning your mother. They might refuse, but it's worth trying. Sometimes personal presence works better than official requests. The idea of going to demand something from officials scared me. But the thought of sitting idle was even more unbearable. I'll go, I said firmly. Right now. The state notary office was stuffy and smelled of old paper. A long line of exhausted people stretched to the window. I waited 40 minutes only for a sleepy woman behind the glass to lazily tell me that without a case number and exact date, she wouldn't search for anything. My explanations, that I was the daughter, that my mother had died, made no impression. File an official request. Processing time, 30 days, she mumbled, turning to the next visitor. That was it. A wall. Bureaucratic, impenetrable. I stepped into the corridor, feeling utterly defeated. Another failure. I was about to leave when a side door, apparently leading to office rooms, opened. A woman hurried out, glancing around nervously. She clutched her handbag tightly, and a chill ran through me. I recognized her from behind. The walk, the coat, the hairstyle. It was my Aunt, Lydia. Aunt Lydia! I cried. She flinched as if struck, slowly turned. Her face was a mix of fear and surprise, almost unnatural. Brittany, what are you doing here? Me? I stepped closer. And you? What are you doing here, Aunt? She fidgeted, avoiding my eyes. Me? Just handling some business. Pension papers, you know how it is. Bureaucracy. She spoke quickly, in a flustered way, not looking at me. Aunt, I'm in trouble. Chris, he kicked me out of the house. He said Mom signed the apartment over to him. I looked into her eyes, expecting to see sympathy, outrage, shock. But there was none of that. Her gaze was empty, darting around. Oh, what are you saying? How terrible, she muttered. Oh, Brittany, I'm so sorry, I'm in such a hurry, I have to go. We'll talk later, I promise. Hang in there. And she practically ran off, pulling me down the corridor toward the exit, not letting me say another word. I was left standing in the middle of the echoing hall. Pension papers? In the notary's office? Something wasn't right. A burning, sticky suspicion began to grow in my soul. That evening, while I sat in my temporary room staring blankly out the window, Killian's phone rang. He spoke for a few minutes, and I heard his voice change. He came into my room without knocking, his face dark. That was Cliff, he said. He used his channels. He managed to get an unofficial look at the registry copy of your mother's deed. I held my breath. And the document does exist. It was drawn up by Notary Parker a month and a half ago. Your mother's signature, at least on the surface, looks very authentic. I felt a chill. So it was all true. The end. But that's not all, Killian continued, his voice hard as steel. By law, when such a transaction is executed, especially involving an elderly person, the notary must ensure the person is competent and making a voluntary decision. For this, a witness is required, a person not interested in the transaction, who confirms in writing that everything was done willingly and with sound mind. He paused, looking straight into my eyes. The deed has a witness signature. A person who certified in writing that your mother, Gwinnett Mays, was fully conscious, of sound mind and memory, and that she voluntarily, without any coercion, gave her apartment to Chris Osmond. I stared at him, not understanding where he was going with this. That witness, Brittany, was your own aunt, Lydia Hughes. No. This couldn't be. My mind refused to accept it. Aunt Lydia? Mom's sister? She would never. She had cried at the funeral. She hugged me. She had said words of support. This is a mistake, I whispered, shaking my head. Some terrible mistake. Cliff must be wrong. Another person with the same name. Brittany, Killian said softly but firmly, her full details are on the document, including her registered address. There's no mistake. I jumped up. Inside, everything boiled. Distrust wrestled with the terrible, icy suspicion. Her behavior at the notary's office, her darting eyes, her lie about pension papers, it all formed a monstrous picture. But I refused to believe it. I couldn't. It was too much. Too cruel, even for this nightmarish day. I have to talk to her, I said, my voice unfamiliar to myself, hard, almost harsh. I need to hear it from her. Now isn't the best time, Killian began. Best time, I cut in. Tomorrow, the wake. At her house. The whole family will be there. I'll go and ask her. In front of everyone. She won't be able to lie to my face in front of the family. Killian looked at me long and heavily, and I realized what he was thinking. He thought I was too naive. That I didn't understand what I was getting into. But I had to. I had to be certain. To dispel this monstrous thought, or learn the truth. Whatever it was. The whole next day I spent in a daze. Lily tried to distract me, suggesting a movie, a walk in the garden, but I couldn't do anything. I just sat and waited for evening. Waited for the moment I could look my aunt in the eyes. Aunt Lydia's apartment was crowded with people, distant and close relatives, old friends of Mom's, neighbors. The heavy scent of wine and grief hung in the air. Everyone spoke in low voices, recalling Mom. Aunt Lydia, in a black dress with a tragic expression, fussed at the table, arranging plates. When she saw me, she feigned sympathy. Brittany, darling, you're here. Come, sit. We need to remember your mom. She busied herself around me, putting food on my plate, pouring juice. And she never once looked me in the eyes. I waited. Waited until everyone had eaten, and the conversations had become more general. I didn't want to cause a scene. I just wanted to ask quietly. Finally, the moment came. Most guests had left, only the closest remained, cousins, their husbands, a few old family friends. We sat at the table, and someone again remarked what a kind, bright woman my mother had been. I drew in a deep breath. Aunt Lydia, I said so quietly that only those beside me could hear. I need to speak with you. She tensed. About what, darling? About the apartment. About the deed. Everyone at the table went silent. Dozens of eyes fixed on us. I was at the notary yesterday. They told me you were the witness. That you signed that document. Is that true? I looked at her, pleading with my entire being, hoping she would laugh. Say it was nonsense, some terrible mistake. But she didn't laugh. Her face twisted for a moment, as if a mask had slipped. And beneath it, I saw malice, fear, and triumph. But it lasted only an instant. The next second, she covered her face with her hands and broke into loud, theatrical sobs. Oh, good heavens, she cried through her tears, addressing not me, but everyone present. What is happening? My own niece, on the day of her mother's wake, accusing me of who knows what. The relatives at the table whispered to each other, shuffling chairs. Cousin Shirley, Lydia's daughter, jumped up and hugged her mother. Mama, calm down. Brittany, have you lost your mind? I just asked a question. My voice cracked into a shout. A question. Lydia squealed, pulling her hands from her dry eyes. You're accusing me. Me, who loved your mother more than life itself. Yes, I signed. Signed. And do you know why? She jumped, knocking over a glass. Her face flushed crimson. Because Gwinnett asked me to. She saw what you're like. Weak, spineless. She was afraid you'd be alone and fall apart. She wanted a strong man by your side. A master. Someone like Chris. She told me, Lydia, make sure the apartment goes to Chris. He'll take care of it. He won't let it be wasted. She spoke, her words like poison seeping into the ears of the stunned relatives. She was lying. Lying so brazenly, so monstrously, twisting everything upside down. That's a lie. I shouted. Mom would never have said that. She loved me. Loved? Lydia sneered. And did you love her? When was the last time you even visited her before she got sick? Always too busy. Work, husband. And who sat with her? Who bought her medicine, cooked her soup? Chris. Your beloved son-in-law. He cared for her, not you. That's why she rewarded him. And you, greedy, ungrateful girl, are only thinking about the apartment when your mother hasn't even been in the ground long enough. It was too much. I looked at the faces of the relatives. On their faces was judgment. They believed her. Her theatrical tears, her loud accusations, were more convincing to them than my quiet, desperate truth. I realized I had lost. I had just been publicly trampled, humiliated, and it was done by my mother's own sister. And then, at the height of this horrid scene, the front door opened. Chris appeared in a black suit, holding a bouquet of carnations, his face sorrowful, grieving. He entered just in time, as if waiting for his cue. What's happening here? He asked quietly, pain in his voice. Chris. Lydia screamed, throwing herself into his chest, feigning tears again. She's accusing us. Saying we plotted. That we deceived her mommy. Chris gently patted my aunt on the back, then swept his eyes over the room, resting them on me. There was no anger in them. Only a deep, universal sadness. He was a masterful actor. Brittany, how can you? He whispered, and the entire room fell silent. I understand your grief. But we cannot behave like this. Your mother made a decision. We must respect her will. He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he straightened and addressed everyone. Friends, relatives. I know this is hard, but life goes on. And to honor the final wish of my dear mother-in-law, who wanted a fresh start for all of us, I have made a painful but necessary decision. He looked at me again, and deep in his eyes, I saw that same cruel glint from the cemetery. I have decided to sell the apartment. Immediately. To close the past and start a new life. The room nodded sympathetically. I stood, struck dumb. Sell. Sell our home. Erase all memories. But it wasn't over. He paused, like a seasoned speaker, before the final, most important phrase. But I didn't just sell the apartment. It happened that the buyer is a major developer. And he wasn't interested in my property alone. He made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I sold him the entire house. Our house. And the neighboring one too. A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Yes, Chris nodded, enjoying the effect. In 2 months, everything here will be demolished. And a new luxury residential complex will be built in its place. So we're not just starting a new life, we're erasing the old one from the face of the earth forever. I said nothing. There was no point. The performance was over, the roles played. I turned and walked to the exit, silently. I felt dozens of eyes on my back, judging, curious, a few sympathetic. I didn't care. I walked across the room, past the table with the cold funeral dishes, each step echoing in my head. In that moment, I realized this was war. And I had just lost the most important battle. Outside, it was dark and damp. Killian Blackwood's car stood where I had left it. He sat behind the wheel, seemingly not even looking at me. But as I approached, he started the engine. I slid in beside him, and we drove off. The entire ride to his house, not a word was spoken. I stared out at the city lights but didn't see them. One phrase from Chris kept hammering in my mind, erased from the face of the earth. And then, like a lightning flash, those words connected with another, from Mom's note. Don't trust the walls. Tear down the house. Erase the walls. Don't trust the walls. Everything fell into place with a deafening clarity. I shuddered. Mom knew. She had foreseen something. Or even known for certain. She knew Chris would want to get rid of the apartment, the house. And she left me a clue. A key. That strange, old-fashioned key. It wasn't for some locker or cabinet. It was for something inside the apartment. Within the walls. And I had only 2 months to find it, before the walls turned to dust. That thought filled me with a surge of energy I hadn't felt in a long time. Desperation vanished, replaced by a feverish, determined resolve. When we arrived at Killian's house, I turned to him. "I need to go back," I said. "To the apartment." He looked at me, and I saw understanding in his eyes. He didn't ask why. "Chris changed the lock. They won't let you in." "I know. But there must be another way. There must be a spare key." And then I fell silent. Another memory surfaced, distant, from childhood. I was about 10. Mom and I were getting ready for a month-long trip to the south. I ran through the apartment, checking that everything was turned off. Suddenly, Mom spoke on the phone, to someone very familiar, but I couldn't remember who. She said, "Yes, we're leaving. I left spare keys with you, just in case. Fire, flood, whatever. You're the only person I can trust with them." At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, I looked at Killian Blackwood, the man Mom had once entrusted with all her savings. The man she had trusted enough to swear an oath to care for me. "It was you," I whispered. "She left the keys with you." Killian was silent for several seconds, then slowly nodded. "Yes, it was me. She asked me not to tell anyone. Said they should stay until the last possible moment." "That moment has come," I said. "I need them. Right now." He didn't argue. He stepped out of the car, and I followed him. We entered the house. He went to his office, I stayed in the hall. A minute later, he returned with a small ring of 2 ordinary metal keys, our old keys. "Be careful, Brittany," he said, handing them to me. His voice was more serious than ever. "Chris is unpredictable. Better to go at night, when he's definitely not home." I took the keys. Cold, heavy. Keys to my house. Keys to my last hope. I waited until midnight. Lily brought me dinner, but I couldn't eat a bite. I sat in my room, watching the clock. When the hands met at 12, I put on a dark jacket, slipped the keys and the small flashlight Killian had given me into my pocket. He drove me. Again, no words were exchanged. He stopped the car around the corner from my apartment. "I'll be here. If anything goes wrong, call me," he said. The courtyard was empty and silent. Dark windows of the apartment building stared at me like blind eyes. I slipped inside and climbed to my floor, careful not to make a sound. There it was, the door, with its new, gleaming lock. My heart pounded so loud it seemed to echo through the entire building. I pulled out the old keys and inserted one into the lower, old lock that Chris hadn't replaced. Holding my breath, I turned it. The click seemed deafening. I froze, listening. Silence. I pressed the handle. The door moved and creaked open. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I switched on the flashlight and froze on the threshold. The apartment was empty. Completely. Chris had taken everything. No sofa, no table, no bookshelves. Nothing. Bare walls, bare floor. The flashlight beam revealed the familiar outlines of the rooms, but they felt foreign, dead. Across the walls, like scars, ran thick chalk lines, crosses, and numbers, markings for the workers who would come to demolish everything. The air was stale, smelling of dust and emptiness. I walked through the echoing rooms. Each step reverberated. Here had been Mom's bed. Here, my chair where I loved to read. And here, in the kitchen, we had our evening tea. Memories surged so strongly I almost choked. But now was no time for tears. I had a goal. I went to Mom's bedroom, stood in the center of the empty room, and turned off the flashlight. I paused in the dark, listening to my instincts. Don't trust the walls. I remembered Grandpa, Mom's father, telling me how during the war they hid valuables, making secret compartments and false walls. Maybe there was something similar here. I switched the flashlight back on and methodically tapped the walls, centimeter by centimeter. The sound was uniformly dull. I circled the room. Nothing. I began to despair. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe the note was just the ramblings of a sick woman. Then my gaze fell on an old ventilation grill near the floor, behind where the wardrobe had stood. It was old, cast iron, layered in paint. Mom always said not to touch it, it was part of the building's ventilation. But now something seemed wrong. It sat in the wall oddly, as if it had been removed recently. I crouched and tried to lift it with my nails. No luck. I pulled the keyring from my pocket and used one key as a lever. The grill shifted with a groan. I shone the flashlight into the dark hole. Deep inside, behind dust and cobwebs, I saw it. Cold metal gleaming. The outline of a small lock built into the wall. My breath caught. I pulled the special key Mom had left and inserted it into the lock. It slid in easily, as if just removed from there. I turned it. A quiet, dry click. I reached into the hole and felt something cold and heavy, pulling it out. It was a small metal box, covered in dust. I placed it on the floor. Heavy. Very heavy. Hope exploded inside me. It was all there. Documents, valuables, Mom's true will. Everything needed to prove I was right and to destroy Chris. I sat on the floor, placing the box on my lap, and shakily flipped the latch. Lifted the lid. And at that exact moment, the front door burst open with a deafening crash, slamming against the wall. Chris stood in the doorway, framed by the light from the hall, his face twisted with a rage I had never seen before. I knew it, he growled, lunging toward me. The neighbor called, said lights were on. Thought she'd sneak a little gain, huh, you little. He rushed over and froze above me, eyes locked on the open box in my lap. His eyes widened. He'd been expecting treasure too. But I looked inside and couldn't believe my eyes. The box was empty. Completely empty. Except for a single, neatly folded sheet of paper lying on the velvet bottom, a formal bank document. "What's this?" he hissed, snatching the paper from my hands. I didn't resist. I was in shock too. He unfolded the sheet, examining it by the light of his phone. "Contract bank safe deposit box," he muttered, reading. His face twisted. "So that's where everything is. She hid it in the bank and put this dummy here." He looked at me, narrowing his eyes. "This was all your setup. You knew. You planned to come, take the valuables, and leave me this trash." I didn't know anything. I shouted, rising from the floor. "I found it the same way you did." "You lie," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. "You came here to steal. Into my house." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my shoulder. "That's it, you've played enough. Now you'll dance for me." He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Hello, police? I want to report an illegal break-in with intent to steal." "Yes, right now." "Address?" I listened in disbelief as he gave our address. He was calling the police. On me. Accusing me of theft in my own home, stolen from me. The absurdity reached its peak. I tried to break free, but his grip was iron. "Let me go." "You have no right." "I do," he laughed in my face. "It's my property. And you're a thief, sneaking in at night. Let's see what story you tell at the station." The police arrived surprisingly fast. 2 tired, sullen men in uniform. They entered, surveying the empty apartment, me, Chris, the box on the floor. "There she is," Chris rattled off immediately. "I came, and she's here, broke into my safe. There's the box, and there she is." He spoke confidently, assertively, like the good sales manager he was. He handed them the deed he apparently carried with him at all times. One officer flipped it in his hands, glancing at me. Ma'am, your documents. I had nothing on me. My passport was in my bag, in Chris's car that day at the cemetery. I don't have any documents. He took them. The officer snorted skeptically. Understood. We'll go to the station, sort it there. They didn't listen to my explanations. What could I say? That the house was really mine? That my husband was a villain? To them, it was simple. Here's the owner with documents, and a woman without papers, at night, in someone else's apartment. Their job was to file reports, not untangle family dramas. They led me out like a criminal. Put me in a cold, gasoline-scented car. I managed to see Killian Blackwood's black car slowly following around the corner. So he saw everything. He hadn't abandoned me. That thought was the only thing keeping me grounded. The police station was even worse. Worn walls, dim lighting, the stubborn smell of unwashed floors and cheap tobacco. They took me into a small office and seated me at a table. A young investigator with tired eyes began asking questions. I tried to explain the situation, but he only half listened, recording something in the report. Chris sat across, calm, methodically lying. Claiming I had long threatened him, that I was mentally unstable, that he suspected I might attempt theft. The metal box and bank document were entered as evidence. The situation was desperate. I had no documents, no alibi, no witnesses. Only my word against his and the official papers for the apartment. I realized I could be detained for 3 days, or longer. 2 hours passed. The investigator was preparing my detention papers when the door opened. Cliff, Killian's lawyer, stepped in, followed by Killian Blackwood himself. Their presence in that shabby police station was like a king appearing in a peasant's house. Killian wore a fine coat and radiated authority and confidence. The investigator jumped. "And you are?" "I represent Brittany Mays," Cliff said. He nodded to Killian. "And this is Killian Blackwood. I think you know him." The investigator looked at Killian, and his expression changed. The name Blackwood was known to everyone in the city, a major developer, philanthropist, a man with immense connections. "Mr. Blackwood," the investigator stammered. "What brings you here?" "I am here to vouch for Brittany," Killian said evenly, in a tone that brooked no objections. "And to ensure her rights are not violated." Everything then unfolded like a movie. The investigator's tone shifted sharply. He became polite, attentive. Cliff quickly reviewed the report, made a few remarks. Half an hour later, I was walking out of the station. Released on my own recognizance until all circumstances were clarified. Chris stormed out after me, red with anger. "What is this? Why is she being released?" he shouted after the departing investigator, but no one paid him any attention. We drove back in Killian's car. I was silent, exhausted, and humiliated. "Don't worry," Cliff said from the front seat. "The worst is behind you. Chris's complaint is nonsense. We'll prove you had every right to be in the apartment. But right now, the key is that document." I managed to photograph it while the investigator was distracted. We arrived at Killian's house. He led us to his office. Cliff connected his phone to a large monitor, and the image of the very sheet from the box appeared on the screen. I leaned closer. It was a safe deposit box rental agreement, signed at the Central Branch of First National Bank, dated 30 years ago. Mom had arranged it while Dad was still alive. Hope flared in my chest. There it was. That's where everything was. Mom trusted no one and nothing. She didn't keep valuables at home. She had hidden them in the most secure place, and this contract was the key. "This changes everything," I said, feeling strength returning. There could be anything in there. The real will, documents, money, everything to prove Chris is a fraud. "Yes, a very strong move," Cliff agreed, enlarging the image. "With this contract, as the sole heir, you can access the safe. All we'll need is the death certificate and proof of your relationship." I stared at the document, at Mom's familiar signature at the bottom. Then my gaze caught the line above. The safe's owners. There were 2 names. The first, Gwinnett Mays. I leaned closer. The letters were slightly blurred from the old typewriter, but I could read them. The second name. The person with equal rights to the safe. Someone who could come to the bank at any time and open it. My heart stopped and then raced uncontrollably. The second co-owner of the bank safe, designated 30 years ago, was, and had always been, my Aunt, Lydia Hughes. I stared at the name on the screen, and the world tilted again. Lydia. Again her. She had been a witness to the deed. She had known about the bank safe from the very start. 30 years she had known and kept silent. My mother, so cautious, so distrustful, had trusted her older sister. And what did she do? Killian and Cliff were silent, watching my face. They understood everything without a word. So she can access the safe alone? I asked, my voice hollow, foreign. Yes, Cliff confirmed. As the second owner, she has full rights. She doesn't even need your mother's death certificate, just her ID and the key. The key I didn't have. But why? I whispered, more to myself than to them. Why would Mom do this? Why include her? Perhaps in case something happened to her while you were still a child, Killian suggested. She wanted someone in the family to be able to care for your future. She trusted her sister. Trusted. That word now sounded like mockery. I didn't sleep all night. I sat in my room, replaying everything I knew about my aunt, our rare family gatherings, her perpetually disapproving face, her sharp remarks about Mom I had once dismissed as just her difficult nature. She had always seemed to compete with Mom, whose windows were cleaner, whose pies tasted better, whose daughter was smarter. I had never thought much of it. But now those small details formed a grotesque pattern. By morning, I had a plan. Mad, desperate, but the only one possible. I couldn't go to the bank without my aunt. So I had to force her to go with me. I said nothing to Killian. I simply asked his driver to take me to one address, Aunt Lydia's. She lived in an old apartment building, just like ours. I buzzed the intercom. No answer for a long moment. Finally, a sleepy, irritated voice came through. Who? It's Brittany, Aunt Lydia. I need to speak with you. A pause. Then a click, and the door opened. She met me at her apartment door, wearing a worn bathrobe, hair disheveled. No trace of yesterday's grief on her face, only anger and suspicion. What do you want now? She hissed, not inviting me in. I silently handed her the printout, the photograph of the bank agreement that Cliff had made. She looked at the sheet, and her face froze. She recognized it. She remembered everything. How did you get this? Her voice trembled. Doesn't matter. What matters is there are two names. My mother's. And yours. I stepped forward, forcing her to let me in. I propose a deal, Aunt. A truce. We go to the bank together. Open the safe. And everything inside, we split 50-50. Fair. Half and half. I stared her in the eyes, trying to appear calm and businesslike. I thought her greed would take over. That she would agree. Half of something valuable is better than nothing. But I was wrong. She looked at me, and suddenly her face twisted into a malicious, triumphant smirk that made my skin crawl. She laughed. Quietly at first, then louder and louder. The laugh of someone who had shed a mask. Half, she breathed, laughing. My dear, what a fool you are. Just as naive a fool as your mother. And then it poured out of her. She no longer played a role. She spoke what had evidently built up inside her for decades. You think I forgot? You think I don't remember how she always got the best of everything? She was prettier. Everyone admired her. Her husband was a professor, cultured. And mine, a simple worker. Our father, your grandfather, always compared us. Look at Gwinnett, smart girl. And you, Lydia? Just SOSO. Everything worked out for her. University, good job, distinguished husband. And my Shirley? Barely finished college. Married a failure. Her whole life. All my life, I was in her shadow. In the shadow of your saintly mother. She shouted, waving her arms, her face blotched red. It was a torrent of pure, concentrated hatred, decades in the making. And now you come here and propose to split something with me? With me? After all that? I'd rather choke than give you a single cent of what your mother left. But why? I whispered, stunned by this flood of rage. Why help Chris? Why sign that paper? You betrayed your own sister. Betrayed? She laughed again. I restored justice. Your mother lived better than me her whole life. So now, after her death, let her daughter taste what I had to endure my whole life. Let her learn what it's like to be left with nothing. Her eyes burned with a fanatical fire. I realized money wouldn't sway her. This was something else. Something personal. What did he promise you, Aunt? I asked quietly. What could Chris possibly have promised you that it was worth betraying your sister's memory? That it was worth throwing your own niece out on the street? Money? A share of the apartment sale? I thought she wouldn't answer, that she'd remain silent or start shouting again. But suddenly, she stopped. That cruel, triumphant smile appeared on her face. She looked down at me like a crushed insect. Money? She scoffed contemptuously. Chris is a clever boy. He knows what I need. He promised me something that money can't buy. She paused, savoring the moment. He promised me what I've waited for all my life. What should have been rightfully mine, but your grandfather, my father, gave to his darling Gwinnett. I stared at her, not understanding what else my grandfather could have given her. He had nothing but an old car and then I realized. The country house. Our old, crooked country house. The small plot of land and cottage my grandfather had built with his own hands. Mom had adored that place. We spent every summer there. Lydia saw my realization in my face. Her smile grew even wider. Yes, darling. Our family house. Chris promised it to me. We signed a deal. As soon as he sells the house and settles all the formalities, he will transfer it to me. Finally, it will be mine. The land that Father always promised me but then gave to your mother. Justice will prevail. I looked at my aunt, her triumphant, twisted, hate-filled face, and felt something inside me break. The last drop of family connection, the last hope that any humanity remained in her. She was ready to destroy me, my mother's memory, everything, for a little old house and a plot of land. To satiate the envy she had carried her whole life. This news about the house changed everything. Until now, I had been fighting for myself. For my home. For my rights. But now it was something bigger. The country house, the memory of my grandfather. Of my grandmother. Of the happy days of my childhood. Chris hadn't just stolen my present. Together with Lydia, he intended to steal and trample my past, the legacy of my entire family. A cold, calculated rage boiled inside me. This was no longer just the hurt of a humiliated woman. This was the fury of a protector. I realized I no longer had the right to be weak. I had to fight. For myself, for Mom, for Grandpa. For everything they had tried to take from me. I said nothing more to Lydia. I simply turned and left. A clear, merciless plan was already forming in my mind. Back at Killian's house, I found him in his office. He was on the phone but cut the conversation short when he saw my expression. What happened? I know why she did it, I said without preamble. Chris promised her our country house. He's liquidating family property. Then I told him everything, Lydia's torrent of hatred, her lifelong envy. Killian listened silently, his face growing darker. This is no longer just fraud, he said when I finished. It's a conspiracy. Calculated and cruel. But one thing I don't understand, why does Chris need this? Selling the house for demolition brings enormous money. Why is he giving it away so easily? Why the rush? He must be desperate. We need to find out why, I said. We need to find his weakness. And strike there. Killian looked at me with new respect. He saw I was no longer a victim. Good. I have people who can find that out. Quickly and quietly. He picked up the phone and made a call, speaking in short, clipped sentences, giving Chris's name, workplace, and car model. Hanging up, he said, by evening, we'll know everything about him. The results exceeded all expectations. That evening, Killian called me to his office again. A folder of papers lay on the desk before him. It turned out to be simpler and dirtier than I thought, he said, handing me a sheet. Your husband, he's a gambler. I looked at the document. It was a printout of his bank transfers. Huge sums flowing to online casinos, betting accounts. In the past 6 months, he's lost everything, Killian continued. Not just your joint savings, but also massive loans. And his debts aren't to banks, they're to serious people. People who won't wait for a court decision. The repayment deadline passed 2 weeks ago. They've put him on the clock. Now it all made sense. His haste. His cruelty. His willingness to give the country house to his aunt, just so she would help him pull off the apartment scam. He didn't just want to start a new life, he was saving his own skin. The money from the house sale was needed to pay off his creditors. The developer he sold the house to, I began, a burning realization hitting me. That's not a developer, Killian shook his head. A shell company, registered to a front person. Essentially, they are his creditors. They're simply taking his only asset to cover the debt, so Chris won't get any real money. He's just buying his way out of death. And the price of that buyout was my life, my home, the memory of my family. We have to stop the deal, I said. Cliff has already filed a lawsuit to invalidate the deed. But that's a slow process. The court can place a lien on the property, but that will take weeks. By then, the house sale might already be closed. We need to act faster. And then an idea came to me. Wild, risky, but perhaps the only right one. In our town, the most powerful weapon had never been the police or the courts. The most powerful weapon was gossip. What neighbors passed on, what women discussed in market lines. Information spreading faster than any virus. We'll hit him with his own weapon, I said. Not legally, socially. We'll destroy his reputation and derail his deal. I shared my plan with Killian. At first, he frowned, but then interest appeared in his eyes. He called Lily. I explained the idea to her. Unlike her father, she lit up immediately. This is brilliant, she said. In our town, it will work 100%. We divided the tasks. Lily took care of the younger crowd. Through her friends and social media, she was to start a ripple, subtle, not direct. Heard Osmond from sales is in trouble? Deep in debt, something shady with his mother-in-law's apartment, even the police were called. My task was the old guard. I went to the Central Market, the place where all the town's gossipers gathered. I approached Mrs. Shaw, who sold vegetables and knew everyone. I bought some tomatoes and, almost casually, with a sad sigh, shared my woes. Not accusing, just lamenting. Oh, Mrs. Shaw, I don't know what to do. Chris, my husband, has completely lost it. They say he blew all the money on gambling. Now he's selling Mom's apartment to pay off debts. And I hear the papers aren't all clean, some investigation going on. I'm scared, they might even put us all in jail. I spoke with a tremor in my voice, tears in my eyes. Mrs. Shaw nodded sympathetically, absorbing every word. I knew within an hour the whole market would know. Later, I ran into a former colleague from the museum. We sat in a cafe. I told her the story again, with different details, about the strange deed, the suspicious notary. We worked like this for 2 days. Quietly, methodically, like spiders spinning a web. We didn't claim anything. We worried. We whispered, overheard things. Rumors spread across the town, from kitchen to kitchen, from building to building. They picked up details, but the essence stayed the same: Chris Osman, a fraud and debtor, and the sale of the old apartments, a dark, risky deal. We waited. And it worked. Faster than we expected. On the third day, Cliff called. His voice was excited. "Brittany, I have news." "A bombshell." "What is it?" I asked, my heart freezing. "My source at the registration office just called. The developer, yes, the one buying your house, has withdrawn the documents. The deal is frozen." "Why?" "Seems the rumors reached them too," the lawyer's voice held awe. "Chris's creditors, these so-called gangsters, may not fear the police. But they panic at investing in a problematic asset. They don't want property the court could seize. They don't want scandal or public attention. They heard about the investigation, about the deed dispute. And they hit the brakes. Deal canceled. Completely, irreversibly." I stayed silent, trying to grasp the scale of our victory. "What does this mean for Chris?" I asked. "It means," Cliff said slowly, "he no longer has the money to cover his debts. And his creditors, who just lost a huge deal because of him, are now very, very angry." I hung up and felt, for the first time in many days, a taste of satisfaction. Cruel, vengeful, but sweet. We had cornered him. Cut off his lifeline. Now he was alone with his debts and very, very angry people. I knew he wouldn't let it go quietly. A cornered beast is the most dangerous. I waited for his strike, but I had no idea how vile and ruthless it would be. A few days passed. I regained some composure and realized I couldn't stay forever in Killian's house, living off his care. I needed to return to my life. To work. I worked as a tour guide at our city's historical museum. Not the most lucrative job, but I loved it. Loved the old things, the quiet halls, the grateful faces of visitors. I called the director, Tina, explained I'd had family issues after Mom's death, and said I was ready to return. Tina was an old-school woman. Strict, demanding, but fair. She listened and said, "All right, Maze. I'll see you tomorrow. You have a school group at 11. The next morning, I walked to work with nervous anticipation. It felt like returning from another world. There was my museum, the old mansion whose every creaking floorboard I knew. Colleagues greeted me with sympathy, asking about Mom. I answered briefly, not going into the horrors I'd endured. I just wanted to work, to immerse myself in routine. At exactly 11, my group arrived. Noisy, curious ninth graders. I led them through the halls, describing the life of our city in the 19th century. I got carried away, my voice steady and confident. For a while, I almost forgot what was happening in my life outside these walls. We were in the largest hall, dedicated to the merchant class, when it happened. The doors slammed open. Chris stood in the doorway, unhinged. Pale, eyes red and wild. His suit wrinkled, hair disheveled. He looked like a man on the edge of a breakdown. Everyone turned, the students, a few visitors, and Mrs. Mason, the attendant. "Brittany," he shouted, making the glass in the display cases rattle. "I found you." He strode toward me, pushing frightened children aside. The teacher gasped, trying to corral them. "Chris, what are you doing here?" "Leave," I said quietly, trying to stay composed. "Leave?" He laughed hysterically. "You're the one leaving, straight to prison." "Do you know what she did?" he yelled to everyone in the hall. "This woman is a thief and a fraud. She's ruined my life." People froze. Mrs. Mason rushed toward the exit, apparently for security or the director. "She's spreading lies about me." Chris continued, pointing at me. "She sabotaged my most important deal. She's after my family. She drove my poor aunt to a heart attack." The students watched the scene with open mouths. I stood frozen, the humiliation physically burning my skin. "It's not her first time." Chris's voice climbed higher and sharper. "Did you know she was registered as a juvenile? In a psychiatric clinic. She was treated. She has violent outbursts. She's dangerous. It was a lie. Brazen, monstrous. But in his delivery, it sounded almost believable. He was a natural manipulator. At that moment, Tina entered the hall. She walked at her usual deliberate, authoritative pace. 2 security guards followed her. "What's going on here?" Her voice was calm, but metallic. The management." Chris cheered. "I'm the husband of this woman, Chris Osman. I came to inform you that you're employing a mentally unstable person. She's harassing me, trying to take my property. She's been treated in a mental health clinic." He rattled it off breathlessly. Tina listened without changing expression. Her gaze shifted between him and me. I could see the mixture of fear and curiosity in the eyes of colleagues gathered at the doors. My reputation, built over years, was crumbling in minutes. When Chris finally ran out of breath, Tina made a barely perceptible gesture to the guards. They stepped forward and took him by the arms. "Escort this individual out," she said, still calm. "And call the police for public disturbance." Chris struggled, but the guard's grip was ironclad. "You'll regret this," he screamed as they dragged him out. "I'll sue. You're protecting a criminal." The doors shut behind him. A deafening silence filled the hall. The teacher quickly gathered the shocked students. Colleagues awkwardly looked away. Tina looked at me. Her face was like a mask, showing no emotion. "Maze, come to my office." My heart sank. I walked down the long corridor after her, knowing this was the end. After such a public scandal, I wouldn't be allowed to stay at work, especially in a conservative institution like our museum. In her office, she sat behind her massive oak desk. "Sit." I perched on the edge of a chair. "Tina, I can explain everything. It's all lies." "I don't need your explanations, Maze," she cut me off, looking away. "We are a state museum. We cannot allow such scandals. Reputation is everything." Her tone was dry, official. The verdict was clear. "I cannot fire you without cause. But from today, you are suspended indefinitely, pending an internal investigation and official review regarding this incident." Suspended. Worse than being fired, suspended, a public mark of shame. I felt tears welling up but forced myself to hold them back. I would not cry. Not here. Not in front of her. "I understand," I said, standing. "Wait," she stopped me. "You need to sign the order." She took a form from her desk and handed it to me. I stepped forward to take it. Alone in her office, she looked me straight in the eyes. Her face remained stern and impassive. As our hands met, she did something strange. She gripped my hand tightly, keeping me from taking the paper. Her gaze was still cold. But I felt something small slip under the form, a tightly folded, compact piece of paper. She said nothing. Not a muscle twitched on her face. She simply released my hand, leaving me holding both the suspension order and the tiny bundle in my palm. I walked out of her office, past the sympathetic and curious stares of colleagues, collected my things from the locker, and stepped onto the street. I walked without paying attention to the road, humiliated, crushed, stripped of the last thing I had left, my job, my pride. A few blocks away, I stopped and unclenched my fist. In my palm lay the small, tightly folded sheet of notebook paper. I unfolded it. There was no writing, just an address, written in neat, careful handwriting. Street, house number, apartment number. I knew the address. Cliff had given it to me. It was the home address of the notary, Parker. I stood in the middle of the street, looking at the address, and everything clicked in my mind. Tina. Her cold, impassive face was a mask. She couldn't openly take my side, it would compromise her and the museum. But she had done what she could. She had given me a weapon. She had pointed out the weakest link in the chain. The feeling of humiliation and despair was replaced by a new, icy determination. I clenched the paper in my fist until my nails bit into my palm. I would no longer go to Killian with my head bowed, asking for help. I would go to him with a plan, with the key to our victory. I called him right there from the street. "Killian," I said, my voice sounding firmer than I expected. "I know what to do. I have the home address of Notary Parker." A pause on the line. "Where did you get it?" he asked. "That's not important. What matters is we need to pay him an unofficial visit. Your people, the ones who looked into Chris's debts, can they find out everything about him? His accounts? His recent large purchases?" When I returned to his house, the atmosphere was completely different. No sympathy now, only businesslike, almost military. In the office, Cliff sat with two other imposing men. The computer monitor displayed spreadsheets and satellite maps. Killian commanded like a general in a war room. When he saw me, he nodded. "You're thinking clearly, Brittany. The strike needs to be fast and precise. My people have already checked everything. Our notary, Parker, bought his wife a new, expensive car 2 weeks ago. And a month ago, he paid off a mortgage that should have taken 7 more years to finish. With his official income, that's impossible." "A bribe," I breathed. "A huge bribe," Killian confirmed. "And we know who gave it and when. We have all the proof. So what are we waiting for?" I asked. "We were waiting for you," Killian replied. "This is your fight. You decide how we act." "I'm going with you," I said without hesitation. "I want to see his eyes." We drove late in the evening, 2 cars. In one, me, Killian, and Cliff. In the second, the 2 other men. We stopped in a quiet residential neighborhood in front of a regular apartment building. Parker's apartment was on the 7th floor. We took the elevator up. Killian rang the doorbell. No one answered for a long time, though muffled footsteps and voices could be heard inside. Finally, the door opened slightly on the chain lock, revealing a frightened, bloated man in his 50s, Brandon Parker, the notary. "Who are you? What do you want?" he mumbled. "We need to talk, Brandon," Killian said calmly. "I think it's better if you open the door and hear us out." Parker saw the 2 sturdy men behind Killian, and his face turned white as a sheet. He fumbled, removed the chain, and let us in. The apartment was small, crowded with furniture. It smelled of medicine and fear. A frightened woman peeked out from a room, his wife. "Lucy, go to the kitchen and don't come out," Parker whispered. We moved into the living room. He stood in the middle of the room in a wrinkled tracksuit, trembling. He wasn't a villain, just a weak, cowardly man who had made a mistake and now panicked at the consequences. "Two don't understand." "What's going on?" he stammered. Cliff didn't waste time. He placed a folder on the table. "Here, Brandon," he said in a steady, merciless tone. "Bank statements. Here's the sales contract for your wife's car. And here are the documents proving early repayment of your mortgage. And we know exactly where the money came from." Parker looked at the papers, his legs buckled, and he collapsed into a chair. "I know nothing. This is a mistake." "No mistake," Killian cut in. His voice was quiet, but the threat in it made shivers run down my spine. "You have 2 choices, Brandon. First, we hand this folder over to the prosecutor's office and the notary board. You lose your license, get convicted of large-scale fraud, and go to prison. For a long time." He paused. Parker stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. "And the second way," Killian continued, "is to write a full confession. Right now. Tell us everything, who bribed you, how you forged the deed. Then, maybe, you get a suspended sentence. And you help a good person," he nodded toward me, "recover what was stolen from her." Parker was silent, breathing heavily. His eyes darted from Killian to me, to the lawyer. He was looking for a way out, but there was none. "Two can't." "They'll kill me," he whispered. "They'll kill you anyway," Killian said sharply. "If they find out you failed, and we can protect you. Choose." It was over. He broke. All resistance melted from his face, leaving only primal fear. "I'll write everything," he croaked. "Everything you tell me." Cliff grabbed clean sheets of paper and a pen. Parker took them with trembling hands. He began writing, telling how Chris Osmond came to him, offering $100,000 to backdate the deed to the apartment. How Parker initially refused, but the temptation was too great. He explained how they forged my mother's signature using an old sample document. I listened, boiling inside. This was proof. Complete, undeniable. With this confession, Chris was finished. Parker finished writing and handed the sheets to Cliff. The lawyer read them carefully. "All correct?" he asked me. I nodded. But something still nagged at me. Something in his story felt incomplete. "Tell me, Brandon," I said, my voice unexpectedly loud in the silent room, "was this Chris's idea? The deed, the witness? Did he plan it all himself?" Parker raised a hunted look at me. He hesitated. "Tell the truth," Killian said firmly. "The whole truth." The notary shrank back again. He lowered his head. "No," he whispered. "It wasn't his idea. Osmond, he's just a greedy fool. He would never have pulled this off. He was just the executor. A pawn." I held my breath. Then who? Who was the mastermind? Who organized all this? Parker was silent for a moment, gathering his courage. "The person who came to me first. The one who planned everything. Who knew all the loopholes in the law. Who knew your mother was sick and would die soon. Who knew I was deep in debt and could be easily bought. The person who picked me because I once helped them with a shady deal. That person brought Osmond to me. They were in charge." "Who?" I asked, my heart stopping. The notary looked at me with eyes full of despair and fear. "It was a woman. An older woman. She said she was your relative, your aunt, I think. The entire scheme, from choosing the right moment to sign to bringing in a witness, which she became herself, it was all her idea from the start. Your aunt, Lydia Hughes. Lydia. Not just an accomplice. Not a helper. The architect. The mastermind of this monstrous plan. She found Chris, found the notary, figured out how to deceive, how to pressure. Her hatred, her envy, fueled the whole machine of destruction. Chris was just a greedy, foolish tool in her hands." I looked at Parker's frightened face, and the puzzle in my head finally clicked. Her fake grief at the memorial. Her performance in front of the relatives. Her lies at the notary office. It wasn't just an attempt to hide guilt. Those were moves in her own, long-planned game. We left the notary's apartment, leaving him trembling in his chair. In Cliff's hands was his signed confession. It was a victory. Huge, decisive. With that paper, we could completely destroy the deed in court. Chris was finished. But that wasn't enough for me. On the drive back, I stayed silent. Killian and Cliff discussed legal next steps, but I wasn't listening. The notary's confession destroyed Chris, but it barely touched Lydia. Yes, she was mentioned, but proving her role as mastermind would be hard. She would deny everything, claim she was misled, say she only wanted to help her brother-in-law. She could walk away clean. That was unfair. She was the root of the evil. She had to pay. And then there was the safe deposit box, the bank safe, in which she was the second owner. What was inside? Why had my mother included her? Whatever it was, I couldn't let her get there first. Now, with the apartment plan collapsed, she would surely rush to the bank to claim the last piece. I had to beat her there. But how? I didn't have the key. I couldn't get in without her. That meant I needed to lure her there with me, but not like last time, offering a deal. I had to play on her greatest vice, her all-consuming greed. "I have an idea," I said, cutting off the men's conversation. "How to get Lydia, and how to open the safe." I laid out my plan. Cliff frowned. "It's risky, Brittany. Looks like provocation." "It's the only way," I argued. Legally, we can't touch her. She's too cunning. We have to catch her in the act. Killian listened silently, then looked at me and nodded. Do it. The next morning, I grabbed the phone. My hands were shaking, but my voice had to sound convincing. I found her number and pressed call. She picked up almost immediately. What now? She barked. I took a deep breath and began my performance. My voice trembled with fear and panic. Aunt Lydia. I cried into the phone. Something terrible has happened. What is it? Speak clearly. Chris was taken yesterday. Raided. They say it's some criminal case. Fraud. There was a dead silence on the line for a few seconds. I could almost feel her trying to process the news. What case? Her voice tightened. I don't know. They aren't telling anything. But the worst part, they said they're freezing all family assets. All accounts, property, everything. While the investigation is ongoing. I paused, letting her feel the threat. Aunt, the bank safe. The one that was under Mom's name, it's also under yours. They'll seize it. Seal it. And there's everything. Everything? Her voice sharpened like a needle. Don't you remember? My voice dropped to a desperate whisper. Mom told you. Grandma's diamonds. Necklaces, earrings. She hid them from everyone. Said they were for a rainy day. That's a fortune. If the police seize them, we'll never see them again. I was lying. Our grandmother never had any diamonds. But Lydia didn't know that. She only knew her sister had always lived better and could very well believe there were hidden treasures. We need to get to the bank immediately, I continued, gasping with panic. Right now. Before they send a seizure order. We have to take everything before it's too late. I have the contract, and you probably have the key. We must make it. Silence fell on the line again. I could hear her heavy, uneven breathing. I knew what she was thinking. She imagined those diamonds. The whole fortune slipping away from her hands. Fine, she said at last. Her voice was steady, but I caught the greed trembling beneath it. I agree. Let's go. I can pick you up in half an hour. I was ready to celebrate my victory. She took the bait. But I had underestimated her. Her suspicion was as strong as her greed. No, she said sharply after a short pause. I can't today. I have a doctor's appointment. Important. Can't cancel. But, Aunt, we can't wait. They could seal the safe at any moment. They can wait until tomorrow. Her voice turned cold and firm. She had already made up her mind. Here's the deal. Tomorrow. At the entrance of the central branch of First National Bank. Exactly 9 a.m. Not a minute later. Got it? I froze. This delay messed up my whole plan. But arguing would only raise suspicion. Okay, I agreed reluctantly. Tomorrow. 9. Deal, she said and hung up. I lowered the phone. The feeling of triumph faded, replaced by unease. Why did she need that day? A doctor? Nonsense. She was lying. She was planning something. Why the delay? To think? To check something? I paced the room, trying to figure out her logic. And then it hit me. The realization was so simple and so terrifying that I stopped dead. She hadn't fully trusted me. She was afraid it was a trap. She needed time to prepare. She needed an ally. Someone to help her grab the diamonds and get rid of me. Someone who, like her, hated me and would do anything. She wouldn't come tomorrow alone. She would call Chris. Tell him about the criminal case, about the asset seizure, about the treasures in the safe. She would tell him it was their last chance to hit the jackpot. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., at the bank entrance, it wouldn't just be my aunt waiting. It would be an ambush, but the thought of the ambush didn't scare me. On the contrary, it strengthened me. I was right. They were partners to the end. And they were walking straight into the trap I had set for them. That evening, I told Killian and Cliff everything. About the call, the delay, my suspicions. They'll come together, I said confidently. And they'll try to force the key from me, or make me open the safe and hand everything over. This is basically conspiracy to commit theft. We could call the police, Cliff frowned. No, I cut him off. No police. This has to happen there, at the bank. Publicly. I'll go alone. But you, Cliff, wait outside, just in case. Killian looked at me worried. Brittany, this is dangerous. Chris is desperate. He's capable of anything. I know. But I'm not afraid. I have to see this through. On my own. The next morning, I dressed. Not in morning black, but in a sharp, professional dress. Styled my hair, applied makeup. I wasn't going to execution, I was going to battle. And I had to look like the winner. I arrived at the bank 10 minutes before 9. A massive building with columns and granite steps. Inside, a huge, echoing main hall. I entered and positioned myself near a column, clearly visible, but able to see the whole hall. My heart beat steadily, like a metronome. No fear. Only cold, ringing calculation. Exactly at 9, they walked in. As I expected, together. Lydia in her finest coat, eyes glinting with predatory focus. And Chris. He looked worse than at the museum, thinner, drawn, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a starving animal. They saw me and headed straight for me. No greetings. No small talk. They came close, flanking me, cutting off any retreat. Where's the key? Lydia hissed, wasting no time. I have the key, I said calmly. But we'll open the safe together. And we'll divide its contents together. Here, under the cameras. Excuse me? Chris snorted angrily. You're trying to trick us? Keep it all for yourself? Hand over the key. He reached to snatch my bag. I stepped back. Don't touch me, I said loudly, drawing attention. People in the hall started turning to look. The guard at the entrance tensed. Quiet, hysterical woman. Lydia hissed, grabbing my elbow. Don't make a scene. Hand over the key nicely. The diamonds will be ours anyway. You won't get them. What diamonds? I stared her in the eyes. I don't know anything about any diamonds. I just want to open the safe my mother left me. Lydia's face twisted. She understood. She realized I had tricked her. You little brat, she hissed. You set this all up. Give me the key. Chris stepped toward me again. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the alcohol and desperation on him. Our whispered exchange grew louder and more heated. We stood in the center of the huge hall, a circle cleared around us. Everyone was watching. The guard was already moving toward us. You having some kind of trouble here? He asked as he approached. No trouble, Lydia tried to smile. Just a family disagreement. We're leaving. But Chris was already on the edge. He couldn't think straight. She stole our key, he shouted at the guard. From our family safe. Stop her. At that moment, a solid man in a sharp suit approached. The bank manager. The guard had clearly called him. What's going on here? His voice was calm but authoritative. Please, do not disturb public order. This man is trying to attack me, I said, looking at the manager. And this woman, his accomplice, is trying to take access to my late mother's bank safe. That's a lie. Lydia shrieked. The safe is mine too. I'm a co-owner. The manager frowned. Give me your last names and the safe number, he said. I gave my last name and my mother's. Lydia gave hers. Chris stood beside her, snorting with anger. The manager walked to the teller's desk and quickly checked something on his computer. We stood there, staring each other down. I could see Chris was ready to lunge at me any second. Lydia nervously fiddled with the strap of her bag. A minute later, the manager returned. His expression was puzzled, almost bewildered. He looked at Lydia, then at me. "I apologize," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But it seems there's been a misunderstanding. You really have nothing to argue about." "What do you mean?" Lydia asked, confused. The manager glanced at his records, then back at us. "I mean, the object of dispute doesn't exist. Individual safe number 312, registered to Gwinnett Mays and Lydia Hughes, has been closed." The three of us froze. "Closed?" Chris croaked. "When?" The manager checked the monitor again. 2 weeks ago. According to the records, the safe was opened, all contents removed, and the rental agreement terminated. The silence that fell between us was deafening. 2 weeks ago. Just days before my mother's death. "Who?" Lydia finally managed to whisper. "Who closed it?" The manager looked at her with polite disbelief, as if she were crazy. "Who, of course, the primary owner. We have her signed statement in our archives. Gwinnett Mays herself closed the safe." The words hit like a verdict. My mother. My mother had closed the safe herself. Chris and Lydia stood frozen, struck like lightning. I could see the same desperate thought spinning in their minds. Simple, impossible, how? How could a terminally ill person go to a bank and empty the safe? That can't be. Lydia was the first to recover. She was dying. She couldn't leave the house. "You're lying." "This must be a mistake." "There's no mistake, ma'am," the manager replied coldly. "We have strict procedures. Gwinnett Mays was here in person. Here's her signature on the closure statement. We can have a handwriting analysis if you wish." Chris was silent. His gaze shifted between the manager and me, a storm of emotions crossing his face, from confusion to raw, animal terror. He was starting to understand something Lydia still didn't. And I understood everything. In an instant. It was her final move. A farewell, brilliant and merciless. Mom knew everything. She knew Chris and Lydia were working together. She knew they'd try to steal everything from me. She knew about the apartment, the deed. And she knew about the safe. She knew Lydia, her own sister, would come for what she thought was rightfully hers. And my mother had beaten them to it. Weak, dying, she had summoned the strength to make this move. She had gathered the last bits of life she had left to strike. She had gone to the bank, emptied the safe, and left them with nothing. She had taken the first move in the game they had been playing against her behind her back. And she had won. I looked at Chris. There was nothing in his eyes now but pure, unclouded hatred directed at me. He knew he had lost. Completely. That there was no money, and there never would be. That his creditors were already coming for him. And he blamed me for all of it. I saw madness ignite in his eyes. He clenched his fists and stepped toward me. The manager, clearly an experienced man who had seen his share of confrontations, reacted instantly. He stepped forward, shielding me, while giving a barely perceptible signal to the guard. "Sir, I ask you to calm down," he said to Chris. "Otherwise, I will have to call the police." Then he turned to me. His face was calm, but in his eyes, I noticed something new, a kind of understanding, almost protective. "Brittany," he said softly, so only I could hear. "Please, come with me. Just for a word." He led me aside, away from Chris and Lydia, frozen like statues. We moved toward his office, right there in the main hall. "Your mother," he began when we were alone, "Gwinnett was an extraordinary woman. Very wise. Very strong." I looked at him, confused. "When she was here, 2 weeks ago, she anticipated something like this," he said, nodding toward my tormentors. "She left something for you. And she made me promise to give it to you only under one condition. What condition? I whispered. If you ever come to this bank with your aunt, Lydia Hughes. She said, if Brittany comes with her, it means the worst has already happened. And she'll need help. Tears streamed down my face. Mom. Mommy. Even in death, she continued to protect me. She had thought of everything, every step, every detail. The manager opened the safe in his office and took out a large, thick envelope sealed with multiple wax stamps. Here. This is yours, he said. I took the envelope. It was heavy. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it. Slowly, carefully, I broke the seals and opened it. Inside were several documents. And I immediately saw what it was. The top sheet, on embossed paper with watermarks, a will. I pulled it out. It was a real, official, notarized will. Made 3 weeks ago by another, honest notary, apparently recommended to my mother by people she trusted. I skimmed the lines. The text was simple, clear, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I, Gwinnett Mays, being of sound mind and memory, leave all my property, of whatever nature and wherever located at the time of my death, including the apartment at address and the country house at address, to my only daughter, Brittany Mays. Everything. The apartment. The country house. Every last blade of grass. It was all mine. The deed my mother had signed was just paper, a fiction, because this will, written later, automatically nullified any previous instructions. But that wasn't all. Under the will was another sheet. Not official, just a simple page from a notebook, written in a familiar, though now weak and trembling, hand. A letter. From my mother. To me. I began reading, and the world around me disappeared. Brittany, my dear daughter. If you are reading this, I am no longer here. And that means what I feared most has happened. Forgive me. Forgive me for not telling you everything sooner. I didn't want to scare you, didn't want to drag you into this mess. I hoped I could manage on my own until the end. The last few months were hell. Chris changed. He became a stranger, cruel and demanding. At first, small amounts, then more and more. Threats. He said if I didn't help, they'd kill him. He yelled at me, knowing I was weak and sick, driving me to tears. These weren't just threats, my daughter. This was torture. Every day, he methodically broke me. Then he brought in Lydia. Your aunt, my sister. And she sided with him. She said I had to help him, that he was strong, that he'd take care of you. Together, they pressured me. And then I realized they were working together. They wanted everything from me and to leave you with nothing. And I decided to fight in the only way I could. I pretended to give in. I agreed to sign the deed for the apartment. I knew it was fake. I knew I would make a real will later that would cancel it. But I needed proof of their collusion, their pressure. That deed, signed under duress, in the presence of their hand-picked notary and with Lydia as a witness, is not just a document. It's their sentence. I was gathering evidence, my daughter. For you. For the court. Forgive me that I had to go this way. But I had no other way to protect you. I finished the letter, tears streaming down my face, but not tears of grief or humiliation. These were tears of pride. Of love. My quiet, modest mother, whom I had always thought almost helpless, had been a true fighter. She hadn't given up. She fought for me until her last breath. She hadn't just left me an inheritance, she had left me a weapon. And a battle plan. I carefully folded the letter, placed it along with the will back into the envelope, and left the manager's office. In the huge bank hall, Chris and Lydia were still standing in the same spot, whispering furiously to each other. When they saw me, they fell silent. Hatred, confusion, and greedy curiosity painted their faces. They saw the envelope in my hands and were dying to know what was inside. I said nothing. I walked past them with my head held high, as if they weren't even there. I felt their piercing gazes on me, but I didn't care. The game had moved to a new level. And now, I set the rules. Outside, Cliff was waiting. He saw the envelope, saw my expression, and understood everything without a word. "What's in it?" he asked as we got into the car. I handed him the document silently. He quickly scanned the will and then the letter. His face grew more serious by the second. When he finished, he leaned back and exhaled. "Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Your mother was a genius. What does this mean legally?" I asked. "Everything," he said, his eyes flashing with professional excitement. "It changes everything. Before, we had a case about fraud, document forgery. Now, we have the testimony of the victim herself. This isn't just fraud anymore. It's abuse, extortion, psychological torment of an elderly, sick person. Completely different charges, completely different consequences. With this letter and the notary's confession, we won't just get your apartment back. We'll put them both away. For a long time." He immediately called Killian. I could hear him urgently explaining the contents of the documents. An hour later, we were in Killian's office. Cliff was dictating an emergency filing to his assistant, complaints to the prosecutor and petitions to freeze all property owned by Chris and Lydia. The legal machinery was moving at a furious speed. I knew we would win. There was no doubt about that now. But sitting in that quiet, expensive office, I realized it still wasn't enough. A legal victory was one thing. But there was also a social victory. Chris and Lydia hadn't just trampled my rights. They had destroyed my reputation. And worst of all, they had tarnished the memory of my mother. At the memorial, in front of the whole family, Lydia had painted her as a madwoman who had betrayed her own daughter. Chris had branded me crazy at work. That lie had spread through the city. And they continued living their lives. I couldn't let people remember my mother that way. I couldn't let them see me as a greedy schemer. I had to reclaim my good name and clear my mother's. And it had to be public. In front of the same people who had witnessed my humiliation. "I need to hold another memorial," I said suddenly, interrupting the men's business conversation. They looked at me, surprised. "Brittany, now is not the time," Killian started. "No, exactly now," I cut him off firmly. "This won't just be a memorial. It will be justice." And I told them my plan. I would rent a small hall. I would invite everyone. All the relatives who had turned their backs on me. All my mother's friends and neighbors who had listened to Lydia's lies. All my colleagues from the museum who had witnessed my shame. Everyone. And I would tell them the truth. All of it. From beginning to end. Lily, who was also in the office, listened with bright, burning eyes. "I'll help," she exclaimed. "I'll make the invitations, elegant and formal. And I'll deliver them personally to everyone." The plan was bold. But Killian, looking at me, understood I wouldn't back down. "Fine," he said. "Go ahead. I'll cover the hall and all expenses." For the next 2 days, we prepared. Lily and I drafted the invitations. They were simple, heartfelt. "Brittany Mays invites you to an evening of remembrance, celebrating the true life and legacy of her mother, Gwinnett Mays. No accusations. No hint of scandal. Just a memorial evening." Lily proved an incredible organizer. She printed dozens of invitations, personally delivered them to relatives, neighbors, and my mother's friends. She went to the museum and handed a stack to my colleagues. She was my loyal soldier, my right hand. Only 2 invitations remained, the most important ones. "They need to be invited too," I said to Lily. She looked at me, puzzled. "Who? Chris and Lydia? Why? They have to be there. They need to hear it with their own ears. See it with their own eyes. But they won't come," Lily exclaimed. "They'll realize it's a trap." "No," I shook my head. "They won't. They know nothing. Nothing about the will, the letter, or the notary's confession. They think I'm completely crushed, defeated. They think I'm left with nothing. I paused, trying to think like them, to slip into their corrupt skin. When they get this invitation, what will they think? They'll think it's my last, pitiful act of desperation. That I, humiliated and abandoned, am trying to draw a little sympathy. Lily's eyes lit up with understanding, a spark of excitement. And what will they do? I continued, thinking aloud. They can't resist the chance. The chance to come and watch my final humiliation. To see me broken and crying. Sit in the front row and receive condolences from the very people they deceived. This will be their triumph. Their final act. They will come. Lily took the last 2 envelopes. I'll deliver them myself, she said. And make sure they receive them personally. She left, and I stayed behind, waiting. Waiting for the final battle. When the day of the memorial arrived, I was completely calm. Fear, doubt, pain, they had burned away, leaving only cold, resolute determination. I knew what I had to do, and I would do it. The hall was full. Everyone had come. My cousins with their spouses, who had turned away from me at the previous memorial. Elderly neighbors whispering behind my back. My colleagues from the museum, led by Tina, sitting with unreadable faces. The small universe in which I had lived, where I had been publicly humiliated, was here, and they came too. As I predicted, Chris and Lydia sat in the front row, dressed in black. Their faces carried the appearance of grief. People came up, shook their hands, offered words of sympathy. Lydia nodded sadly, dabbing her dry eyes with a handkerchief. Chris bowed his head, looking sorrowful. They were enjoying their triumph. Their final performance, the role of victims, suffering at the hands of an ungrateful, cruel relative. I stood backstage, watching them. Not a hint of hatred. Only cold contempt. Once everyone was seated and silence fell over the hall, I stepped onto the stage. There was a simple podium and microphone. On a small table beside it, a glass of water and the very envelope from the bank. I approached the podium. All eyes were on me. I saw curiosity, pity, judgment. I scanned the hall. Found Chris, then Lydia. And I began to speak, not from an epitaph, not from memories of my mother. Good evening, my voice came through the microphone, loud, clear, and steady. No tremor. Thank you all for coming. I've invited you here tonight not only to remember my mother, Gwinnett Mays, but to tell the truth. The truth about the last months of her life. And the truth about her death. A murmur of surprise ran through the hall. Chris and Lydia tensed. They hadn't expected me to start like this. Many of you were at the memorial, I continued, keeping my eyes on them, and you heard a lot of things there. You heard that my mother supposedly gave her apartment to my husband, Chris Osmond. You heard that my aunt, Lydia Hughes, was a witness. You heard that I'm a greedy, ungrateful daughter who only thinks about inheritance. I paused. It's all lies. The whispers grew louder. I saw Lydia's face turn red. Chris gripped the armrests of his chair. And I began to speak, calmly, methodically, step by step. I told everything. About the day of the funeral and how Chris abandoned me at the cemetery. About the lock changes. The fake deed. Chris's blackmail and debts. My aunt's envy and hatred. How they together tormented and pressured a dying woman. I spoke, and the silence in the hall grew dense, almost tangible. People listened, holding their breath. I watched their faces change, curiosity giving way to shock, judgment shifting to sympathy and anger. They began exchanging glances, throwing sideways looks at the front row where my tormentors sat, frozen, pale as chalk. When I finished, I picked up the letter from the table. And now, I said, my voice ringing clearly, I want you to hear the voice of my mother herself. This is her final letter. Written just days before her death. I read her words, full of pain and suffering. How Chris yelled at her, threatened her. How Lydia betrayed her. How, gathering her last strength, she resisted, pretending weakness while actually setting a trap for them. Every word struck like a blow. No one whispered anymore. Some of the women were sobbing. I saw my cousin Shirley, Lydia's daughter, staring at her mother with horror and disgust. I finished reading, folded the letter. The hall was dead silent. And in that silence, with a deafening creak, the large doors at the end of the hall swung open. Everyone turned. Killian Blackwood stood there. Beside him, supporting him by the arm, was a small, trembling man in glasses, Notary Parker. Killian slowly led him down the center aisle to the stage. The crowd parted before them like water. Chris and Lydia saw him, and their faces twisted in terror. They realized it was over. Parker climbed the stage. He was pale as death, shaking. He grabbed the podium like a lifeline, eyes darting nervously across the hall. I, Notary Parker Brandon, he began, his voice faltering, broken, want to make a confession. Everything Brittany just said, it's true. And he told everything. From the beginning. How Lydia Hughes came to him with a ready-made plan. How she knew all his weaknesses. How Chris Osmond later came with the money. How together they forged Gwynette's signature. How Lydia signed as a witness, knowing it was a crime. He spoke, he cried, he begged forgiveness, from me, and from my mother's portrait on the stage. The effect was explosive. The hall erupted. People leapt from their seats. Relatives who had nodded sympathetically to Lydia just days ago now shouted curses at her. How could you, Lydia? Your own sister? Judas. Traitor. Rot in hell, my cousins wept, turning away from her. The crowd closed in, each person wanting to show their disdain. Lydia curled into a ball, covering her face with her hands. And Chris. Chris jumped to his feet. He was pale, eyes darting through the hall, searching for an escape. And then he saw them. At the same doors where Killian had just entered, two men now stood, those same serious men, his creditors. They didn't smile. They just stared at him. And in their gaze, he read his sentence. His private hell and public shame converged at one point. He realized there was nowhere to run. He collapsed back into his chair, clutching his head. Total, simultaneous, crushing defeat. I stood on the stage, watching. Watching as Lydia was shamed and cursed by those whose respect she had sought so desperately. Watching Chris, a once powerful man, crushed and destroyed. Justice had been served. Not in a courtroom. Here. In front of everyone. I reclaimed my name. I cleared my mother's. I stepped down from the stage. People approached me, colleagues, neighbors. They apologized, shook my hand, hugged me. Tina came up, silently took my hand in hers, and held it tightly. That gesture spoke louder than any words. I walked out into the fresh evening air from the buzzing, roaring hall. My war was over. A week later, after all the legal formalities were completed, Cliff handed me the keys. New ones. To my apartment. I arrived at my building, went inside, and climbed to my floor. The door had been sealed by the police, but now all the seals were gone. I inserted the key into the lock. It turned easily with a soft click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was empty. Bare walls, hollow echoes. But it wasn't the dead, alien emptiness from before. This was a space ready for a new life. I slowly walked through the rooms, running my hand along the walls my mother had asked me never to betray. I went to the window in my room and looked out at the evening lights of the city. It was over. Ahead lay a new life, one I had to build from scratch. But I knew I could handle it. My mother had taught me strength. I turned, stepped into the hallway, and closed the door behind me. The lock clicked. This time, the sound was different, reassuring, steady. I was home. Finally, home. And so this story ended, dear friends. A story where it seemed that evil and betrayal had already claimed total victory. What a terrifying web of lies, long-held envy, and human cruelty had been spun around a woman who only wanted to mourn her mother. But, as you can see, even the darkest night ends with dawn. Strength of spirit, a mother's love that protects even after death, and the help of good people proved stronger than any malice. And yet, in the end, one question remains, a question worth pondering. Was Brittany right to orchestrate such a public, almost brutal, act of revenge? On one hand, her enemies tried to destroy her not only legally but socially. They trampled her reputation and tarnished her mother's memory in front of everyone. Perhaps such a public response was the only way to restore justice and reclaim her good name. They got what they deserved, and in the way that hurt them most. On the other hand, should she have risen above it? Maybe she should have trusted the law, the courts, and avoided retaliation, even a justified one. Is it right to respond blow for blow, humiliation for humiliation? I'm really curious to know what you think. Please, share in the comments whose side you're on in this matter. If you enjoyed this story and felt for our heroine, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is the most valuable thing we have, and it helps us create new stories for you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.